What we are seeing right now is digitalization of surgery. So for the last 2 decades, it was mostly robotics. I mean, there was a robot in the operating room, and right now there are a whole other bunch of technologies that are here to assist before, during, and after the surgery. So there is like pre-surgical planning software that are.
Herzlich willkommen zu einer weiteren Folge unserer Podcast-Reihe German Healthcare 2030. Das Ziel dieser Podcast-Reihe ist es, über die Zukunft des Gesundheitssystems zu sprechen und vor allem mit Blick auf das Jahr 2030. Und das machen wir, indem wir spannende Persönlichkeiten aus dem Gesundheitsbereich einladen. Mein Name ist Julian von Invenion und ich freue mich, die heutige Folge moderieren zu können. Ich wünsche dir ganz viel Spaß und los geht's. Welcome to this new episode of our podcast, German Healthcare 2030. Today it's in English because today I have the chance to speak with an expert when it comes to robotic assistance for minimally invasive surgeries. My today's guest is Lucien Blondel, one of the founders and CTO of Quantum Surgical. And I've already said it, Quantum Surgical is a medical robotics company which has the mission to democratize minimally invasive cancer treatment. You, Lucien, co-founded Quantum Surgical more than 5 years ago in Montpellier in France. And since then, you and your team have shown tremendous success and collected about more than 50 million US dollars in funding. And before you founded Quantum Surgical, you already gained decades of experience in the medtech area, also at GE Healthcare and medtech SAS. And before you studied robotics and computer science, and you also have your own podcast, which I can only recommend to listen to. It's called Less Invasive Podcast. Quite interesting.
Thanks.
And now I'm super happy to jump into the discussion, also into the first question. So maybe, Lucien, you want to elaborate on what I just told to introduce you and also give us an understanding of the vision that you have at Quantum Surgical.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me in this podcast. So basically, I have 20 years of experience in mostly in surgical robotics. I started in 2001, and I've worked in several surgical specialties, laparoscopic surgery to start with, then orthopedics for total knee replacement. Then we moved on to cranial neurosurgery to help surgeon implant electrodes deep into the brain. We had also another application of the robot that is called ROSA for spine fusion surgery. As you mentioned, I worked in medical imaging space at GE Healthcare. They had a tremendous and innovative project to bring robotics into the hybrid OR. So it's an operating room with advanced imaging capabilities, and they had this robotic system to move the imaging system around the table and back to parking at the corner of the operating room. And I started, co-founded Quantum Surgical in 2017 with a new project in the interventional oncology space, which is basically minimally invasive treatments for cancer patients. So maybe, just for Quantum Surgical, just to elaborate a little bit more. So what we do is we have developed a suite of technologies, and at the core of this solution that is called EPION, there is obviously robotics. And basically what we aim at doing is enable more physicians to do percutaneous ablation of small tumors. So the challenge right now is to introduce a needle through the skin into the tumor to activate some kind of energy that is heat or cold. So it's radio frequency, microwave, cryoablation, so that it destroys the tumor. Then you just remove the needle and the patient can be discharged the same day or the day after. So it's a really very beneficial technique for patients. But unfortunately, not that many patients benefit from this technique. It's a challenging technique because it's obviously you have to insert a needle into a tumor that has a couple of centimeters in diameters in the abdomen or the lung or the bone, and where everything is moving. So it's a challenging technique, and we provide a solution that helps to plan the intervention, to guide the insertion of the needle, and then to confirm the placement of the needle and the treatment. So that really makes it more easy for physicians to provide this technique to more patients.
That's extremely interesting. First of all, I assume it adds a lot of value. As you just mentioned, many people don't basically get this treatment. So far in our podcast, we spoke a lot about software solutions, and you have a very different product compared to the previously mentioned software solutions. And I would like to better understand why is it possible today to have this sort of solutions that Quantum Surgical is basically offering? And also, are there some digital components that are enabling these?
So, well, I'm not sure I understand your question, but I will ask what I understood. I will answer what I understood. So basically, it's a robotic system, but most of the product is software because there is software to control the robotic arm. There is software to process the medical images, to do image fusion, to be able to load different modalities. So, for instance, some tumor metastasis will be visible on MRI, and you have to operate on a CT. So you want to merge a CT with the MRI images. So there is a lot of software in this product, and obviously the system is connected to the hospital network. So there is a lot of a digital component into this product. But what is challenging is also the hardware part, because it's not the same timeline for developing the product, making sure it works, do all the testing. You do not the prototyping phase. It's a way different when you develop a hardware than when you develop a software that is basically lines of code that you can rather quickly produce and verify. Whereas when you have to deal with instruments, accessories, big cards, and sensors, components, robots, then it's another timeline when it comes to developing, verifying, and validating this product.
Interesting. I mean, you answered my question, so you understood it correctly. And now I'm also focusing on your software component, and you explained the robotic arm, for example. I also try to, yeah, have this like imagine what it looks like, your solution, and also it probably helps the audience to imagine. When I see now this robotic arm in, for example, in surgery, is it possible that this robotic arm works itself, so autonomously? Or will it be possible at some point in time? And what is your objective? So, do you want to automate the surgeries at some point in time?
It's an excellent question, and it's a question we often get when it comes to surgical robotics. What to give a broader context, right now there are more than 150 companies developing surgical robots, and 99% of them are not automated robots, being it's more an assistant to the surgeon. So it's either helping the surgeon place a drill in the right angle, direction, depth, or manipulating instruments. But almost all of this system, they do not automate anything, because it's still surgery. It's still a complex gesture, and automating all the phases of surgery is still a far away goal. When it comes to our concept that we have developed for more than 20 years, we are onto collaborative robot, because we believe that we can empower the surgeon. That you have to understand that right now they do almost everything freehand. So there are not that many tools to assist them into performing what they have to do. They have visualization means like endoscope, microscopes, or other types of imaging to help them understand where they are in the anatomy. But they don't have that many tools to assist them with the gesture. So our concept is more to have a robot that guides the gesture that has to be performed by the surgeon, rather than a robot that does the gesture instead of the surgeon. So it's more an assistant tool than an automated robot. And when it comes to the question of will one day surgery be automated by a surgical robot, maybe some parts of the surgery. But when it comes really to surgery, you have to take into account that you have to open the skin, remove the muscle, do all the approach to the organ you want to treat, and then at the end you have to close everything. You have to deal with complications, and this is way more complicated to automate, and there is not a lot of value add to have a robot doing all that stuff. So there will be always a surgeon in the operating room doing some stuff, and some parts of the procedure could be automated. And we've seen that there is a robot from Switzerland that is automating bone osteotomy, so using a laser to cut the bone for craniomaxillofacial surgery. But it's just a small part of the surgery. I mean, there is a lot of things to do beyond that gesture that is automated. So in our space at Quantum Surgical right now, interventional oncology is a space where there is no robotics, there is not much navigation. So we still need to educate the market, the customer, the end user, the physician, all the operating room staff to learn how to use this kind of technology, assistive technology, before we make the next step towards automation. So it's still a long run from today.
Okay, and now, I mean, that is basically, yeah, first of all, a good explanation, also a good bridge to my next question, because I was wondering what are the main hurdles also for you at Quantum Surgical when you are trying to introduce your products to the market? As I understand, educating your clients is something very important. Like, yeah, what is the main hurdle when you try to expand your company?
Yeah, I think it will depend for every surgical robotics company because there are many segments of this market. Some of them they have seen robots for more than 20 years, and they are much more educated on what is a robot, how do you deal with the robot, and they are more expecting lower price, more modularity, more easy to use, stuff like that. And on our part, it's another challenge. It's to bring a technology that does not exist today in the interventional oncology suite and have everybody in the room understand what's the benefit of this technology, how you use this technology, and what are also the limitation of this technology, because it's the first generation of this kind of robot. So there will be limitations, and there will be a second generation and a third generation, but there is changes in the workflow, in the operating room setup, in the way you deal with the patient. Maybe you have to change the patient position or do things a little bit different. So there is this, preparation to be made for the operating room staff, and then you have to convince that there is a benefit to transition from freehand to robotic. But right now, it's been demonstrated in many other specialties that robotics is helping surgeons to do their job better or in a more comfortable position. And so hospitals are much more educated on why moving to robotics is a good move.
Interesting. Um, Now, I mean, I mentioned it when I introduced you. You are from Montpellier. Your company is sitting in Montpellier, which is obviously in France. Now, our podcast is called German Healthcare 2030. And it's always interesting for us, also for the audience, to see how it works in other countries. So maybe you, I mean, I don't know if you can make the comparison, how much you know about, for example, the German system or the international healthcare markets in this regard, but I assume your solutions are offered internationally. So maybe you can give us your perspective. It's like what is working quite well, for example, in France when it comes to these new solutions, and maybe also what's maybe working not as good compared to the other markets in the world.
Okay, yeah. So I think the challenge for a European company is to address different markets, because the German market is not the same as the French market, as the Italian market, as the Spanish market. Whereas when you are a US based company, you have a whole country pretty much working the same and with the same language, the same practice, the same kind of training background for the user. So it's a challenge to adjust the product and the sales to each of these market. Right now in France, we have a very strong incentive to create innovation and to create startups in robotics, in surgical technologies. And so right now there are more than maybe 20 companies in France developing surgical robots, and that's maybe one of the top 3 countries in the world when it comes to producing innovation in this field. But the challenge then is to, as you say, this requires a lot of investment. So we raised 50 million euros. So we cannot live without addressing the global market, which is Europe, the US, and China. And so the challenge is to scale up and get the funding that is required to not look only at France, but the whole European market, US and China. And that's the kind of challenge that we have right now in France. It's rather easy to start a new product, to do prototyping, first clinical studies, and get to market clearance. But then when you need to scale up the company and really grow to address this big market, it's a bigger challenge. So, from my perspective, I see that there is also in Germany. I think it's the same as in France. There is a very strong quality research teams at Fraunhofer and other companies that are really strong clinician research in hospitals such as Charité Berlin or other places in Germany, and said that there is a lot of innovation coming from Germany and neighboring countries. I would say Switzerland, Austria. Um, but then creating a world leader in the space, it's much more difficult for I think both in France and in Germany.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, this is something we have heard quite often, and which is definitely the case because we have different countries in Germany. Sometimes it is a benefit, or sometimes it is at least something very nice. On the other hand, when it comes to situations in which, for example, you are with quantum surgical, it's not always easy. When you now think of the future, for example, in 10 years, and I mean, let's be clear. I don't know if 10 years is enough because 10 years is not quite a long time horizon in the medical space. But when you think about the next 10 years, what will be a situation in 2030, for example, when it comes to surgeries?
I think what we are seeing right now is digitalization of surgery. So for the last 2 decades, it was mostly robotics. I mean, there was a robot in the operating room, and right now there are a whole other bunch of technologies that are here to assist before, during, and after the surgery. So there is like pre-surgical planning software that are really growing in clinical use to help people prepare, do a clone of the patient, virtual clone of the patient, 3D modeling, preparing the access route, what they will do, how much of the liver they will remove, will it impact the patient's health. So there is a lot of pre-surgical planning. There is also virtual reality to train surgeon on a procedure, on a workflow, on an equipment that is very useful, not to train basically fellows and patients. There is augmented reality that is coming to the operating room, with augmented reality glasses that can project this kind of pre-surgical planning data onto the patient. So you see the anatomy, you don't have to open the patient and to see the anatomy, you can see the projection on the patient. There are in orthopedics there are smart implants, so that means that there are sensors into your knee implant that will record how many step you do, what kind of range of motion you have, and all this data can be collected and analyzed afterwards to see how the implant is working for this patient. And there are also with the COVID situation, a lot of telemedicine, what we call procedural telemedicine solutions to help surgeon connect with peers remotely, collaborate, and get help from the manufacturer's sales rep during a case. So there is a whole ecosystem of digital solutions that oftentimes are around the robotic system, but not only, that will help surgeons in what they've been doing right now a lot manually, freehand, with their own knowledge in the mental space, and all this knowledge and skills. And I mean, those guys are very highly skilled. Uh, can be transferred digitally into some way to data, and then this data can be analyzed thanks to artificial intelligence and to feed the loop back and get better patient outcomes to predict what will come with a specific patient with a specific equipment and a specific implant. So it's a really a booming field, and there will be a lot of new technology entering the OR, but it still takes some time because it's surgery, it's the patient, it's patient safety, and it has to take time because it's a highly regulated environment, of course, and we need to take things one step at a time.
That was, I mean, first of all, it was very, very good outline of what's out there. And also, your last words are definitely true. Everything takes its time, one step after another. Thanks so much for being in this podcast, Lucien. It was extremely interesting. I hold my fingers crossed that you at Quantum Surgical will continue your really interesting and very strong path that you are going there. Also, good luck with your international strategy that you have. And hopefully see each other again, maybe in 10 years, 15 years, and then we will see what the situation is like.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me in.
Nun, zum Abschluss dieser Folge hoffe ich zuerst einmal, dass sie interessant war und bedanke mich fürs Einschalten. Ich möchte gerne auch noch ein paar Worte zu Invenion sagen. Bei Invenion verfolgen wir das Ziel, die Digitalisierung des Gesundheitswesens voranzutreiben und unterstützen von der Strategie bis zur Produktentwicklung. Für mehr Informationen besucht gerne unsere Webseite unter www.invenion.io, wo ihr uns natürlich auch gerne kontaktieren könnt. Ich hoffe, ihr schaltet das nächste Mal wieder ein und freue mich schon auf den nächsten Podcast. Alles Gute bis dahin und tschüss.